Hi, everybody. This is Elenbaas from Nightlight Astrology, and you're listening to October's horoscopes. We're going to start off with the sun sign of Aries. And as usual, you can always listen to this for your sun sign, your rising sign are the two most common. And then sometimes people look at these in relation to their moon sign. So, a lot of stuff going on this month. Venus retrograde is probably the big highlight of the month. Venus retrograde in Scorpio, which is another Mars-ruled sign like your own home sign of Aries. So we'll be checking that out in all of this month's horoscopes. We'll start with the beginning of the month, and we'll roll through everything. Now, I always say this, that not every horoscope that I do will cover every single transit of the month. There's often too much to cover. So I try to highlight what I feel to be the most important. So the month gets started on October 2nd, really, with a square. I'll annotate this so you can see. There's a square from Mercury to Pluto, from your 7th house to your 10th house. That's the house of relationships and partnerships, and in a sense, your social life or social character, and your career house. So this is a time where you could see communication in the workplace being very important. Topics of communication in your intimate or personal relationships or even business partnerships being very prominent. Maybe with Pluto, there's some things coming up that need to be talked about or discussed or that need to be seen. A lot of the times Mercury-Pluto squares have to do with this kind of powerful upsurge from the unconscious, things that we want to hide or we don't want to talk about, and it'll have a way of coming up sometimes through that Freudian slip or through a conversation that just bubbles over. It has to take place. You want to be careful about potentially also relationships in the workplace that might be manipulative or trying to take advantage of you. Be careful also of kind of making one of those devil's bargains around the beginning of the month. Easy to compromise your values or ethics potentially for the sake of gaining something that you feel you need professionally or maybe in relationships. On the topic of relationships and work, potentially coming together in interesting ways too, like your spouse or partner's work, or meeting someone you like in the workplace or something like that. But also controversial, deep, explosive, potentially explosive topics of conversation. You can also really go have some healing conversations potentially by going beyond the superficial or the status quo into things that are, a little bit more uncomfortable to talk about. So that Mercury-Pluto square is happening right at the very beginning of the month, and really highlights partnerships, relationships, workplace material, and transformative dynamics within those places. So going forward from there, next big transit is October 6th. Venus is going to turn retrograde in your 8th house. The 8th house was traditionally a house that was related to fear and anxiety about the future, the unknown, death, uncertainty, as well as in modern astrology, we sometimes relate the 8th house to death and rebirth or transformative dynamics that kind of take us to our edge or make us face our fears, sometimes, again, including sort of subversive material or material that's taboo, or again, facing things that we're resistant to facing or we're in some level of denial about. 8th house is also about other people's money, or income or assets or wealth that comes from other people or sometimes from death, like inheritance. This Venus retrograde period, which pretty much lasts the rest of the month, will be, and actually it lasts all the way to the middle of November, it will be in that 8th house, which could bring up dynamics about wealth or power in relationships, differing values and value conflicts in relationships. It could also bring about changes in financial status, perhaps within a relationship or with regard to debts or investments and things like that. You could go through a period of time where you are having to face some kind of challenges in relationships and or financially, with a theme of learning, growing, healing, and transforming as well. So this Venus retrograde lasts the rest of the month. It will briefly dip back into Libra. We'll be talking about that more in next month's horoscope. But given that you're a Mars ruled individual as an Aries, you're this is an interesting time for you because you like to do things directly. Mars ruled planet of aggression, confrontation, courage. Venus is more diplomatic, more about harmonizing. And so when Venus is in Mars' sign, it can be a little bit difficult. For you, it might be a little refreshing, a little dose of honesty, authenticity, getting to the bottom of things, confronting things within relationships, though the emotionality of Scorpio may be a little uncomfortable for you as well, or you may feel like it's complicating things when you'd rather go at something directly. So those are possibilities to think about. Now, this month gets really, really busy around the middle of the month, basically. But next thing that happens is as we're moving toward this very busy time, there's going to be a new moon on October 8th in your 7th house. So here's that new moon. You can see Venus retrograding up here in Scorpio. New moon in the 7th is planting a seed for a lunation cycle ahead, has totally all the focus is on relationships right here. So relationships, and then the ruler of the 7th house, Libra, is Venus retrograde. So that's a big moment for you with relationships, friendships, potentially financial issues, and also maybe themes of trying to find balance in relationships. How do you be your Mars-like aggressive, adventurous self while also paying close attention to the needs and desires, the other? How do you pay attention to the other and look for that balance? So very interesting time there with the new moon kind of reiterating what Venus is telling us as well. And then here's where it gets real crazy. On October 10th, you're going to have Venus in Scorpio retrograde, right, in your 8th house. And it's squaring Mars, your ruling planet, in your 11th house in Aquarius. And it is doing so just as Mercury, let me draw this out so you can see it. So here's Venus, the moon will pass through too, squaring Mars, your ruling planet, while Mercury, just having entered Scorpio, is opposing Uranus. Incredible. I mean, that is a powerful series of aspects. What to speak of the fact that on October 11th, the sun is going to square Pluto as well. So it's 2 days that are just the most dynamic time of the month easily. So you really want to circle on your calendars October, like 8th through the 12th as a wide range, zone in on the 10th and the 11th in particular. Let's take it one by one. Venus square Mars from the 8th to the 11th. The 11th house has a lot to do with friends and allies, groups of people. The Venus retrograde in the 8th, maybe dealing with some transformative or deeper catalyzing events within relationships, but also within groups that you belong to, or within groups that you're taking part in, within organizations that you belong to, different religious or professional organizations, among colleagues. And there's a real creative tension here between Venus and Mars, but there's also Mars squares, between Venus and Mars there's a square, and there's some real creative tension between Venus and Mars, but the square is also tense and emphasizes more of the Mars kind of feeling. And so this is a time where you're looking for compromise, but you're also trying to get to the bottom of things. You're trying to confront things, you're trying to go after things. But you're going to be in uncomfortable emotional territory. There's going to be some tension, possibly even sexual or creative tension in relationships and in groups. That's something to pay attention to as well. And you're also thinking about things potentially coming to the surface within groups or among friends that are difficult to deal with. And somehow you have the role of addressing, maybe. So it's the Mars-Venus dynamic is very intense, could also involve things like the resources of money or other people within groups or organizations. You want to be a little bit careful of social opportunism this month, meaning people that are trying to take advantage of you, or people that maybe you feel like you could get something good from, even though there's real underlying conflicts. Be careful of that kind of stuff. But yeah, and then simultaneously, you see Mercury opposite Uranus. For one thing, this can be very inventive. Original ideas can come popping really quickly, which is cool. But you can also see tendency for verbal, mental erraticness. So you can experience a kind of mental breakthroughs, intellectual breakthroughs in learning or studying something, but also that potential to put your foot in your mouth and say what you're thinking in maybe the wrong place, or to come up with ideas that are interesting but maybe not practical, but maybe to run with them and take a risk without thinking about it could lead to problems right now. So you want to be careful of that, especially around money and financial matters across house 8 and 2, which have a lot to do with finances. But also just in terms of conflicting values and maybe financial matters in a general sense, materialistic material values, what I value, what I have, what I want, what I don't want. So desires, values, possessions in the material world, making deals, selling things, buying things, expenses, debts, financial loss, or sudden impulsive financial decisions is kind of the mood of this transit. You could see any of those things coming up. And I think overall, probably the best advice for this is to just expect a more creative and a kind of tension in relationships. It could be productive and really innovative, but also somewhat edgy and possibly destructive. So you want to be real careful about that time right there. And then, as if that weren't enough, the very next day, you're going to see the Sun getting together with Pluto. And there you have a square between the Sun and Pluto that's, between the 7th and 10th, emphasizing once again public reputation, career, people who are in authority, relationships, diplomacy, but some real transformative dynamic, possibly challenges to power, being really mindful about how you come off in public and in the workplace, even though you may have something to assert or something to say. And socially, there may be some risks, for saying whatever you need to say or for doing whatever you need to do. So kind of walking the tightrope, trying to figure out how to be cognizant of other people's needs and other people's realities as you also sort of assert your own. Pluto in the 10th has an agenda. There's power dynamics going on here, but the Sun in Libra is trying to figure out how to do some kind of intricate balancing act within different, maybe several different relationships at once. Whatever you're learning right now, though, about your relationships, whatever comes to the surface, can be potentially very enlightening, even if it's difficult. So take the message or the wisdom of what's happening and use it to make important, make diplomatic, careful, wise, fair, balanced decisions. But you can use the information that comes up to make important changes that whatever may need to be changes that you might be ready for. All right, so then going forward from there, the next real significant transit that I have on my list is on October 19th. So go forward to October 19th, and now we have Mercury in Scorpio making a square to Mars. So the same kind of deep, intense communication dynamics and relationships are being featured with Mercury in the sign of, in the same sign with Venus retrograde. Differing values, again, possibly financial issues. And then here you see Mercury just getting in on that square with Mars. That's a very incisive, potentially combative mental dynamic. So you really want to be careful about argumentation, fights, explosive verbal communication with others, getting that potentially manipulative, email from somebody, or having to deal with passive aggressive qualities, trying to figure out, again, how to tactfully address something that might be, you may need to say something that's sharp or pointed, but figuring out the careful way of doing it, or more direct and overt value conflicts, and the way that different elements of your unconscious are coming to light within communication dynamics. You really want to pay attention to that. It could be the time to get to the bottom of something, to do analysis, to dissect things. It's a very good time for learning. It's a very analytical kind of energy. You also want to be careful of being really judgmental and potentially very edgy or mentally combative or agitated. But again, within groups or within friends, if things need to be said or addressed, or if you're having more tension in those places, I think that's going to be normal. Some of that stuff needs to come up right now. It's part of the overall Venus retrograde that you're going through. You just want to make sure that you do it in a way that is constructive. A lot of times during these kinds of transits, it's very easy to, ruin a relationship. It really doesn't need to be ruined, even though something may need to be confronted. So finally, the full moon is the last one that I have for the month that I am thinking of as pretty darn. It's a pretty dynamic full moon. It's across your second and eighth, again, the financial houses, and you're seeing, basically you're seeing the moon and the sun opposing, with the moon in conjunction with Uranus. So potentially some really important changes or breakthroughs financially, or in terms of work or professional ideas or concepts, things that you're trying to grow or build, and radical new ideas coming through, or unexpected changes or shifts financially, difficult conversations about values in relationships. Once again, that's par for the course for the month. But then by the end of the month, by October 30th, Venus is also going to oppose Uranus. So these energies that I'm talking about, the full moon across the second and eighth, are going to become even more intense by the end of the month, suggesting that there may need to be some relationships that are broken apart from, or some agreements changed, contracts renegotiated, and looking at time, your energy, your money, your resources, your values, and how you may need to make adjustments in your life overall, so that what you're doing reflects those more adequately. So that's what I've got for you this month, my Aries friends. I hope that this was helpful. And, you can feel free to leave any comments as the month goes on. I'd love to hear stories about how these things unfold. All right, that's what I've got, and we'll see you next month. Take care.